Hey guys, I'm here.
All
Ah,
right. So happy that you could join us and that you agreed to do this, Elon. This is taking me back to early 2019. We were at Fremont doing a podcast with you when,
Oh yes.
remember when Tesla was in production hell with the Model 3? And I think you were sleeping under your desk at that time. And you gave us a lot of time to really help us understand this story and what was going to happen, and the rest is history. So just wanted to recount that. You're so often, the media is focused on controversy, and that's how they get their
Yeah.
clicks and hits and all of that stuff. But
Yeah, I think they sort of actually don't really have much of a choice in that any media that isn't focused on controversy and is not maximizing the clicks is going to get outcompeted by media that does maximize the clicks. So we also can't entirely blame them in that they're trying to survive in what is clearly a declining legacy media market. And
yes.
shrinking pie. It's a shrinking pie, and shrinking pie. Desperate times lead to desperate measures, and that's somewhat, frankly, predictable. So
Yes. Well, that's not what we're about at ARC. We're
yeah.
we're all about the future, trying to figure out the way the world's going to work. And well, I'd love to give you an opportunity right now to address what you think mainstream media does not understand, because there's such a
Uh-huh.
big story here. There's so many big stories that offer all kinds of hope and really transformation in the future, and you're leading the charge. So what don't they get, do you think?
Well, I think that's quite a long list of things that don't understand or where they simply don't wish to focus on because it doesn't quite lead to clicks and traffic, whatnot. I could go over at a high level what SpaceX and Tesla are accomplishing or have accomplished this year.
you just said that like media is a dwindling pie and you own a big kind of like media platform franchise. How do you think about the future of X within that context and how it should evolve?
X is actually growing in traffic. So, I mean, again, one doesn't know quite what to believe, but when you look at the traffic numbers, the traditional media is down, but X is up. So I think that's cause for optimism. But of course, the traditional media would never actually write a story about that. And not going to write a story that says, "Hey, we're losing and X is winning," is a very unlikely headline. In fact, you see the opposite headlines, which are quite misleading, that X, FK, Twitter is dying or dead or whatever. I mean, how many times have we seen that headline? It's getting a little tedious. I mean, you could just repost the same thing every month is what it seems like. So I think I feel quite optimistic about the sort of X platform and where it's going, and we're adding a ton of functionality that I think people will find useful. There's been immense progress in just the course of a year. We've accomplished more advancements in a year than I think Twitter had done in the prior at least 5 years.
We've been talking a lot about X. We know it, we own it in our venture fund, and we've been talking about the democratization that you are enabling. Just going back to Tesla, you'll remember that when you were thinking about taking it private, I implored you, no, we've been supporting, the retail investor and others have been supporting Tesla. Don't take it private. You'll take it away this incredible growth opportunity. And so thank you for that. That was a democratization move. But Twitter,
Yeah, and I should say that your letter was influential. It played a significant role in the decision ultimately not to take the company private. We could have taken the company private. The downside was that it would have been quite a big distraction. So, and of course, it would have made it difficult for many investors to remain invested. And the combination of factors of complexity, having to leave behind so many investors, really those are the two factors that why we decided not to take the company private. We absolutely could have.
yeah,
Then I want to be just absolutely clear. And we did have funding secured, so it was more than enough funding.
yeah,
It's worth bearing in mind that I was sued in a San Francisco court, which was jury shopped by a class action plaintiff law firm. It's important to bear in mind in these class action lawsuits, the media will actually write as though it is actually an aggrieved shareholder, but in fact it is not. The true plaintiff is the class action law firm, and the plaintiff is simply a puppet.
yes. Yeah.
So, but the media never mentions this for some reason.
And one of the reasons you took Twitter private was to really enable free speech. And again,
Yeah.
whole democratization, this democratization concept, we're all about that as well. We give our research away. We want people to understand how much the world's changing, how technologically enabled innovation is going to could transform everyone's lives for the better if they get on the right side of change. So yeah, thank you.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So there's like kind of like maybe an argument that sounds or kind of esoteric, but it is the way I actually think about it, that you can think of the X platform or social media in general as kind of a collective consciousness or group mind. And you want to have as much signal and as little noise as possible. And obviously, we've got a lot of work to do on that front, but you want your information to be coming at you from people who are experts in the field, or who are, in the case of, let's say, a war zone, literally in the field, and as opposed to filtered through journalists who are not experts in the field, and who most of the time, probably 99% of the time, are literally not in the at the scene. There's only a few reporters, sometimes only one reporter at the scene. So now, in the past, that it was the only way to have things work. That's why the legacy structure in the past was you had to have information filtered to media organizations, and then and then they would decide what to publish, and they'd publish it, and then people would read a small subset of what was actually going on in the world. And obviously a subset that was chosen by a handful of editors. Mm-hmm. Yeah, curated. So it's sort of, if the editors weren't that interested in the subject, you simply didn't care about it. Now that's in the past, especially in a non-internet world. That's kind of how things, there wasn't really another way to do it. You didn't really have a mechanism for connecting all of the humans. But now with the internet and a fast moving social media, or what social media is a terrible word, but fast moving sort of platform, the X platform, you can actually have you can get all the people out there that are on the platform reporting in information, distilling it down, have people who are world-class experts in their field tell you exactly what's going on. I mean, if you see, for example, the AI discussions on X are by far the best.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Elon, when I conceived of this open source research ecosystem that we've evolved into, I never dreamed that Twitter, at the time it was for tweens and teens and celebrities, and there's still some of those on, but I never dreamed that it would become our primary platform for giving away our research and having dialogue with the people in the field out there we're getting information that no one else in the financial world doing it the traditional way is getting, just because we are engaging with the innovators. So it's a marvelous platform, and I think it's the knowledge workers platform.
Yeah. Hi, Elon. This is Charlie. Yeah. Hey, how's it going? It would be great to learn more about how you're thinking actually about the roadmap to expand X from where you see it today to where you see it becoming, and risks, challenges, and also opportunities of that, including AI, and how you see that transition.
Well, along the lines of what I was saying earlier, it's really sort of kind of create a group mind or collective consciousness where every person is essentially part of that group mind or collective consciousness, and is kind of reporting information to the system, consuming information, giving their opinion on it. And you can just think of it like a giant brain, basically. And I posted, I think a few years ago, that a neuron doesn't feel like it doesn't know it's a neuron. Individuals on the system obviously feel like an individual, but actually you are actually part of a collective sort of group mind. And then so if they say, well, what makes it a better or worse collective consciousness? Obviously speed is very important. How fast is information being transmitted? How is that information, is the most interesting information being propagated to the right other people as quickly as possible? How much noise is in the system? Noise would be information that is either not interesting, obviously spam, scams, actual misinformation. Well, that term is overused. But just say information that is deviates from the truth meaningfully. Because there's always this question of what is the truth, and like there's an old sort of police saying: for any given crime, there are at least 3 stories: the victim, the perpetrator, and the truth. Or that Kurosawa movie Rashomon, where the same event happens, and you see how it's perceived completely differently by 4 different people. So, but nonetheless, one can still aspire to the truth and have the least amount of error. So that's the main thing, is like, how do we get as many people as possible participating in providing information that's accurate, correcting information that is not accurate. And just if you think of it sort of like from an information theory standpoint, this is like, I think, the right way to think about it. Think about it from an information theory standpoint. You want to have what would make for the most effective group mind or collective consciousness. And it's like, are the neurons all communicating as quickly as possible with the lowest signals of noise? Yeah.
Do you think you need to enable users to put like skin in the game behind their messages in a more frictionless way? As in, if I'm like within capital markets, I can put capital to work, right? And I stand to lose it if I'm wrong. And the information space in X it's kind of like a survival of the fittest, but the marginal energy needed to put in for an individual tweet, I can't really change that, or an individual post. Is that like a direction to go?
You mean like when you post something, assign sort of some amount of your credit effectively?
Yeah, I mean, within prediction markets work because people are able to bet on one thing versus another. Like conceptually, if I'm right about something, if I get some kind of like more than just reputational accrual, but capital accrual for being correct about something on X, is that a way to kind of increase essentially effective signal to noise within the network?
Do you have a suggestion for how that might be implemented?
I mean, conceptually, the fact that I can advertise on X, like I can promote a tweet, is in some ways in instantiation of that. But there's no mechanism by which I effectively lose for being wrong. Or maybe within the distribution algorithm there is. But it just seems very kind of like a loose kind of connection between whether or not I'm contributing positively to the network and whether or not the network actually rewards me in some way, either financially or otherwise, for contributing positively.
Well, I mean, we are paying creators for people who are posting on the system and where that post is interesting and gets a lot of views. So that's one way in which people are accruing value. If you post something that's boring or uninteresting, then just or wrong, whatever, you perhaps will get less views and thus earn less. There is this like very challenging problem of bots and trolls, which is, I think, just tackling that, and I think we've made great strides, but there's a long way to go. That is the biggest source of noise, is because the fundamental problem you have right now is that it's quite easy to pass the "Are you a human?" tests. Even if, I mean, basically, open source AI at this point can pass "Are you a human?" tests better, I think, better than most humans, and that's only going to become more widely available. So you have to, I think, bias the network to have to basically raise the cost of manipulation and raise the cost of bots and trolls. You cannot completely get rid of them. This is not possible, but you can make it much harder and much more expensive. Like, I mean, having, say, a drug enforcement agency, like or any kind of making drugs legal, it doesn't make the drugs disappear. It just makes them more expensive. Sometimes there's this false dichotomy of like, well, it's all or nothing. No, you have to do things that dramatically increase the cost of noise in the system so that somebody can't spool up 100,000 or 1 million bots in a day and then manipulate the system. So this is why we've moved to sort of a subscription where there's at least a small monthly payment. Even a small amount, like if like $3 a month-ish, or some small amount, is still several orders of magnitude. It raises the cost of bots by several orders of magnitude, maybe by 1,000 or 10,000. And it's not just the cost, it's not just the dollar amount, but then you effectively piggyback on the payment system, the payment authentication. Mm-hmm. So it's just hard to find more credit cards to misuse. That like there's an actual cost in the black market for credit cards that work. So just biasing things to where the subscribers effectively, or premium users' content is elevated above that of bot amplified content is I think a very big deal.
Sorry.
And my prediction actually is that any given social network that does not move in this direction will be swarmed with and will simply be overwhelmed.
I have an experience with that. We all of a sudden, I guess bots were taking over. This was not on Twitter, or on X, but on Instagram and Facebook. I mean, it was just all over the place. So we've already experienced attacks like that. Can we stay on the X platform as a topic, Elon, but maybe take us a little bit more into the future about this super app opportunity? Will you become a financial platform? Identification and we're already seeing, you're still tipping, I think, on X, but are you going to turn into a financial platform, which which is where you started your entrepreneurial journey many years ago. Is this still on the drawing board?
Yeah, absolutely. We're just waiting for the final approvals to come through for the money transmitter licenses. It's just taken longer than expected to get the money transmitter licenses.
Yes.
So
I did see you have 15 or so now, or is it more?
I think we actually have a majority of the states
Oh,
have approved us, but it's irrelevant until California and New York approve us.
I see. I see. And are there any showstoppers, or it's just bureaucracy?
It's just, really just, I guess, bureaucracy. Things were obviously quite chaotic, especially for the first few months. So it's not entirely their fault. We were a bit late in submitting our money transmitter licenses. And I thought we had done it, but we had not done it until around the middle of this year. So I think we'll probably get our approvals early next year. And so I would expect payments to roll out. I would be surprised if if it takes us longer than the middle of next year to roll out payments. So I'm not aware of any showstoppers. It's just kind of working through the system.
That'll be exciting. If you don't mind, Elon, I'd like to actually make an announcement on X, since we learned in the market that once you say something on X, it actually be public information from the SEC's point of view. We've seen that tested a few times. And so I just wanted to announce that we're pretty excited that for the first time, beginning in January, our venture fund will be available on SoFi. Right now, if you want to buy our venture fund, the Titan app is the way to go. That's an Andreessen Horowitz funded company, and they've been great. But we are expanding, and we'd love, again, in this movement towards democratization of VC, if any other platforms want to participate in this movement, we're not exclusive. And we're very excited about the possibilities. So thank you for letting me do that.
It's also a big part bringing the broader base of a huge number of non-accredited investors who would love to enter companies like yours, Elon, of course, and we are already with the ARK Venture Fund in SpaceX and X, and we'd love to do others. And really allowing, obviously your companies are extremely well funded, but for many companies, they don't have access to capital necessarily at the scale you've built without going public. So we think that's a really exciting potential for companies to stay private for longer.
That sounds great.
Yeah,
that sounds really cool. The burden of being a public company really has increased over time, such that it has somewhat dissuaded a lot of companies from being public. And I really, frankly, would recommend companies don't go public unless they absolutely have to. So, yeah.
Do you think that going back to like the Model 3 ramp, when you had customers and shareholders going out and facilitating delivery of vehicles, do you think that could have happened without people having like skin in the game in the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the people who helped were not shareholders.
that's interesting.
There's not that many shareholders.
I don't know. Elon, so many people have come up to me and all of us over the years because we were out there pounding the table for Tesla against the traditional financial world. And they read our research on Tesla and bought into it. And so many people have come up and said, thank you for doing that research, alerting us to the opportunities. What's happened to the public markets, Elon, is I think they're kind of broken. I agree with you. I think part of it is regulatory, but part of it is the way the traditional financial world works. And I've seen this time and again, is if a company is not in a broad-based benchmark, then financial analysts and portfolio managers very often say, okay, not relevant to me, not in an index, I'm not competing against it. That's how broken it is. Instead of focusing on the future and which companies are going to be transformative and are going to scale brilliantly, they're very nicely situated in the past, when stocks that are where they are in benchmarks because of past performance. That's the other thing that's happened here. But it's important we change that, Elon. And Tesla has been a change maker in that regard. Sure, you didn't get into an index because of the way they construct them until Tesla was $500 billion. So a lot of
It was pretty crazy.
how many companies are bigger than that? It's just crazy. But you did. You made it and you opened people's eyes. And we're trying to change this shift away from passive back to active so that there is an efficient allocation of capital.
Yeah, you're touching on a very important point, which is that I think the percentage of the market that is passive is too great at this point. So at the end of the day, somebody actually has to make an active decision The passive investors are riding on the decisions of the active investors. And so the passive investors like index funds and whatnot they're like they're an amplifier. It's like an electric guitar amp or something. So, but you don't want that amplifier gain to be too high, or you get essentially massive movements of the stock based on the decisions of maybe 4 or 5 active major stock pickers.
Well, actually, it's a little more complicated. So if you're in a risk-off market, a bear market like we were in 22, what actually happens is these managers are very fearful and they just get closer and closer to their benchmarks, and they sell the kind of stocks that we're invested in, because we're completely active. We're benchmark agnostic. We just don't even look at them. We're all about the future. So that's in a risk-off market, punishes stocks that are not in indexes more than otherwise would be the case. And then to your point, it rewards stocks that in a risk-on period that are growing very quickly like yours. And as you say, yes, there's a pile-on effect if they get into a benchmark. Now everybody has to consider them. So it's a really distorted way of that the public equity markets have evolved.
Yeah, I mean, essentially getting into any kind of index or passive fund will, I think, increase the volatility significantly, because just now it's amplified. That stock's not amplified by the passives. And I think Bogle it was a good idea to create Vanguard and passives, but it's just gone too far.
It has.
So you just don't want to have the amp is turned up too high, is a way to think of it.
Yeah.
So there should be more active and less passive.
Totally agree. And absolutely. And the other thing that's happening, I didn't know we were going to go here, Elon, but the other thing that really is gripping the markets is 75% plus of trading every day is algorithmic. And we see they're very simple algorithms. In a bear market, okay, do they have cash? Are they burning cash? And those two variables will dominate the stock action. So, yeah, we've watched this over the last 3 years. It's a very simplistic way of managing money. And I really do think it has led to the most massive misallocation of capital in history. A lot more private companies should be public, but we understand why they don't go public, because of the kind of behavior you're subjected to. And now all about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the regulatory burden of being public is way too high. And then the legal burden of being public is also way too high. So if you're public, you're just going to be sued nonstop by these class action law firms with their fake plaintiffs, as is the case with Tesla. We're just constantly being sued by, as I said, what the media will portray as a member of the class, but in fact, we're just being sued by class action law firms with puppets. Like, that drives me crazy. It happens. It's constantly happening.
But the problem that we're talking about here is non-accredited have not been invited to the venture capital party because they don't make enough money or they're not wealthy enough, which we think is quite a regressive tax.
Absolutely. I fully agree.
That's why we're democratizing venture capital by not taking a carry ourselves, so that we can offer our fund for as little as $500 to anyone.
That sounds great. Well, I think more people should take you up on that.
Yeah.
Most of the vast majority of companies are obviously private. They're not public.
Yes.
And you're right that it is somewhat of a regressive tax that makes it difficult for the average citizen to participate in the upside of those companies, because once you go, I think, above 2,500 shareholders, non-employee shareholders, then you're forced to go public. So the reason that SpaceX cannot simply offer stock to anyone who wants to own it is because of that 2,500 direct shareholder limit.
Right. So, and
do you think that within SpaceX, or just thinking about Tesla versus SpaceX, do you think you've been enabled to take more appropriate risks within SpaceX than you have within Tesla because of the public versus private?
Absolutely. I mean, at SpaceX, we never think about the quarter. We never think about it, and we don't think about the stock price. So there's a lot of pressure, like immense pressure, on a public company to not have a bad quarter. So this can actually result in a less efficient operation, where you're going to great lengths at the end of a quarter to not disappoint people, and that's just how it goes. And then you've also got a long-term challenge with public markets where a lot of the analysts following companies have a time horizon that is maybe only a year or two. It's rarely more than a few years. So they literally don't care, because then their incentive structure is short term. They do not care about what your long term outcome will be, because their career is dependent on how you do in the short term.
Elon,
Right.
you have been great at, I think, standing up to short-term oriented shareholders. That's one of the scores in our scoring system as we're evaluating companies. Is this a visionary management? And will they stand up to short-term shareholders who want their profits now, their dividends, their share repurchases? Will they invest aggressively enough in the future? And I think you've done a great job.
Well, thank you. And credit to the Tesla team as well. So, but that said, at Tesla, we do go to great lengths to ensure that our quarter is good, that we don't disappoint. Because it's not so much about it's just that we feel like we have a sort of moral obligation to, I don't know, to not have a bad quarter and disappoint people. So the number of New Year's Eves that I've spent in delivery centers is like, I don't know, 6, I don't know, 7, I don't know. I've lost count how many times I was delivering cars until like basically midnight on New Year's Eve personally.
Has it done let me just ask the question
Yeah.
the other way. At SpaceX, you feel like you have more degrees of freedom. Being public, has it done anything positive for you, for Tesla?
It did allow us to clean up our capital structure, which was overly complex as a private company, and have a single class of common. So we were really things were getting quite unwieldy with the private company capital structure. There was obviously the capital availability in the public markets, which is a lot more than in private markets.
Mm-hmm.
And a car company is capital intensive. So I guess access to large amounts of capital and cleaning up what had become an extremely complex private company share structure were two major things. Certainly, it was also good to give access to the company stock to small shareholders. So those are good things. But I think it's also been a tremendous distraction as well on the downside. And there's just a lot of overheads. There's more time that's required to manage a public company than a private company.
So in the past, you've talked about potentially, I guess, listing Starlink or doing something on the SpaceX within the public capital markets. But do you think that's actually not something you need to do or anticipate doing across all of your companies outside of Tesla at this point?
I don't think it's worth going public until you have maybe an extremely stable and predictable revenue stream. So if your cash flows are extremely stable and predictable, at that point, going public is less of an issue, because you're just not going to have these big gyrations. So
like the point of the equity markets is to provide like perpetual capital for capital intensive businesses, right? And what you're describing is a business that actually doesn't really need equity capital necessarily. You could debt fund it to some degree if you have very stable cash flows, right?
I mean, I can equity or debt fund just about anything at this point. But it's worth noting that in all the companies across all the years, I've never lost money for an investor even once. And this is now over 100 financing rounds. Now, of course, I cannot stop people from selling when they should not sell, but I have never driven them to a bad outcome. So that's pretty good. And obviously, when you've treated capital well, then capital it treats you well in turn. And so it's basically very easy for me to raise almost any amount of capital, frankly. Now, of course, I need to make sure that track record stays intact and not get complacent or entitled. But obviously, I do not have a need to raise capital. And in fact, in most cases, I don't really need, even for, say, like Boring Company or Neuralink, I mean, I could just fund it myself entirely. But I think it is good to have other investors.
Why even bother with outside shareholders at all? It'd be simpler you could take whatever risk you want without having to answer to anybody.
Well, I do take a lot of risks either way. I don't know. I think it's good to have, I don't know, I think it's good to have other investors. I think that each investor you add is an ally. It's good to have more allies. I think it also establishes that I'm not delusional in the valuation of the companies. So if others are prepared to invest at a particular value, then I'm not the sole decider of what the value of the company is. Others are deciding what the value of the companies are. It's sort of an assessment of the value of the company. And there is also a need to provide liquidity to people at the company. So I believe in providing stock to the people at the company, the employees and creators of the company. It's important to provide them stock to have the incentive be aligned with the company outcome. And then they at various points want to gain liquidity, so that you want to then establish an outside valuation, and so it's not just me deciding it, and enable liquidity for those who've been awarded stock and options at the companies. And it's generally been my approach to award everyone at the company stock. At Tesla, we awarded everyone stock no matter how junior they were. So that actually obviously made a lot of people millionaires. I think Tesla may have created more employee millionaires than any company in history.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, if there's a company that's created more employee millionaires than Tesla, there's one or two others, but really the sheer Tesla's around 140,000 people, and I think we might be number one. So.
I think you are. So I'm conscious of time here, and thank you so much, Elon. Frank Downing, our director of research on next generation internet, asked Grok, what questions do people want Cathie Wood to ask Elon Musk?
Okay.
And we would be remiss if we didn't summarize this first and then let you take it where you'd like. And it basically said, it seems that, this is Grok talking, seems that people are eager to hear about the latest developments in in AI technologies. We definitely are, such as FSD-12 and the next generation platform for Robotaxi. They're also interested in learning more about the company's plans for the Optimus project. Additionally, there is a lot of curiosity surrounding Elon Musk's thought on the AI space, as well as his take on the future of Bitcoin. I guess that was a little repetitive AI there, but these topics are sure to spark some engaging discussions. That's Grok for you.
Okay, well, that's pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good. AI. And
I do have more time than if you
Oh,
would like to
good.
go longer than 15 minutes. We can go longer than 15 minutes.
Super.
Right. I tried to distill my thoughts here on AI because I could really talk 4 hours on AI.
We both, Charlie and Brett, are steeped in it. So is Frank. And of course, Tasha, she's done our work on Autonomous. But one of the things we've been very curious about is open source versus closed AI. And I don't know if you've seen the chart that Frank Joseph did on our team, but they drew a line. They basically calculated performance improvements in both the closed or private AI companies and models, large language models, and then the open ones. And open is behind closed, but the performance is improving at a steeper rate than closed. Do you have any thoughts about that and about open versus closed generally when it comes to AI?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think a lot of people know that I was instrumental in the creation of OpenAI, and in fact, I came up with the name. The open in OpenAI means open source.
Open, yes.
And it started as an open source nonprofit. And the reason I wanted to create it was to establish a counterweight to Google DeepMind, because it was a unipolar world at that point. Google DeepMind had probably 2/3 or more of the top AI talent, and of course, vast computing and financial resources. And at the time, I was close friends with Larry Page, and it did not seem to me that he was taking AI safety seriously. So I felt there needed to be some counterweight, some competitor to sort of the Google DeepMind situation. So, and frankly, instrumental in creating the company was recruiting Ilya Sutskever, which was a back and forth thing where actually Ilya changed his mind a few times and ultimately decided to come to OpenAI. And so I won that recruiting battle. And that is actually what caused Larry Page to stop being friends with me, frankly. But now, ironically, because fate loves irony, OpenAI is a super closed source and for maximum profit. It should be renamed Closed for Maximum Profit AI. It won't be more accurate. So, because it's literally the polar opposite of how it was started. I guess I generally have a bias in favor of open source, and you can see that certainly with the X platform, where we've open sourced the algorithm, and for community nodes, we open source not just the algorithm but all the data as well. So you can see exactly how a node was created. It can be audited by third parties. There's no mystery, nothing hidden at all.
I think that's seems to be one of the confusing things about open source as pertains to large language models is it's not as simple, and I think this has been lost in some of the debate, as just open sourcing the code. It's open source as the shades of gray here, of course, with parameter weights, data, there's all of that spectrum, and I think that's been maybe lost from some of the debate, so it's great to hear.
Yeah, there's actually very little code, very little actual traditional lines of software. Certainly at the first level, there's very little, it's a remarkably tiny number of lines of code. So it's to these giant weights files and what your hyperparameter numbers are. And it's basically a giant comma-separated value file. I always find it amusing to contemplate that perhaps our digital god will be a CSV file. And then you make a new CSV file that has maybe more weights, and the weights are better, and then you pretty much delete the old one. So just the AI is evolving and deleting its prior self constantly.
So we're going to worship a giant Excel file, essentially.
Kind of. I mean, you need a very big Yeah, it's a lot of cells, but it's really just a bunch of numbers. And then those numbers they're getting smaller in magnitude too, going from FP16 to FP32 to FP16 to int16 to int8. And now it looks like things are trending towards mostly int4. So they're not particularly large numbers. Yeah.
And back to
So, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm probably not answering the question, but I mean, I think it's true that closed source is not that far, from a time standpoint, not that far ahead of open source. But let's say, and if you assume open source is you have every 6 months, because of the immense rate of improvement of AI, that 6 months is actually a massive amount of time. Or at least the delta in an exponentially improving situation, 6 months will, I think, feel like an eternity. So I think closed will outperform open by a meaningful amount at any given point in time.
and given
yeah.
I was just going to say, given the questions we were talking about before about truth and not truth, and do you think in 10 years' time AI will have been a net truth improver or detractor from where we are today?
Well, I think it'll be speaking for, at least for Grok, I think it will be a significant truth improver. That is literally our goal, is to be maximum truth seeking, maximally curious, minimizing the error, perceived reality and described reality and actual reality, and always acknowledging the error, not being too confident about it. So I think that there will be a competition for truth, and people will tend towards the one that they think is most accurate. So, and if there's at least one AI that is aiming for maximum accuracy, I think it pushes all of the AIs to aim for maximum accuracy. Just as with the X platform, FK, Twitter, as soon as X pushes for maximum truth and accuracy, it sort of forces the hand of others. The others now also have to do that.
Right. The truth arms race among the CSVs. And is one of our theses, I think, with ARC is that Tesla is one of the most undervalued AI companies there is, because of the insane amount of data you've got on all or to feed into Autonomous. I don't know if there's any commentary on that, because I think obviously with the rise of these LLM companies, which are by and large working off essentially available data that is not proprietary, the benefits coming to the companies like Tesla that understand how to use the AI benefits, but do have these enormous proprietary data pools, seems like that's going to be the next frontier.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate description. Tesla is one of the leading AI companies in the world, and with respect to real world AI, it is obviously by far and away the leader. The word large language model, phrase large language model, LLM, is massively overused. But what I do see happening is somewhat of a convergence towards intelligence. Tesla, really to make full self-driving work, you kind of need baby AGI in the car, because you need to understand reality, and reality is messy and complicated. And just as a side effect, the car AI has to be able to read, for example. It has to be able to read arbitrary science as a little side effect of understanding reality in every language. So everything is coming down to different layers of transformers and diffusion, and how you put together the transformers and diffusion. That's why I sort of made that somewhat niche AI joke on the X platform. Who do you think will be president in 2032? Transformers or diffusion?
Do you think that switching to full stack AI for Tesla's full self-driving reduces the kind of forecast error for you in terms of when the problem will be solved? As in, you famously have said it's a year away for a few years now. Do you think that actually line of sight, wherever it ends up, you'll have a better line of sight on when you're going to cross a particular threshold of performance where it can go without human intervention?
Yeah, I mean, the car is already incredibly good at driving itself. So now, especially if you say okay, drive in California, which is both generally easy driving because you don't have heavy rain and snow and that kind of thing in most parts of California, and Tesla engineering is primarily in California, so it's going to overfit for solving California. But if you're just driving, say, around Palo Alto, the probability that you'll need an intervention at this point is incredibly low. And in fact, even if you're driving through San Francisco, the probability of an intervention at this point is very low. So we're really just going through a march of nines. How many nines of reliability do you need before somebody does not need to monitor the system?
What's so interesting, GM basically shutting down Cruise. Tasha has done the work on safety, and it seems that Tesla with FSD has an accident once every 3.2 million miles. At Tesla without FSD, 600,000 miles. The average vehicle on the road, I think this is surface streets, 190,000. And Cruise was 40,000. So there really was a safety issue there. Do you worry that it has potentially set back regulators from considering autonomous transportation? Or is this data, given that accidents on the streets have gone up in the last 10 years, fairly dramatically, actually, because of texting?
Yeah.
Do you think that regulators are going to look at the data, which, I mean, we've done the research, Tosh has done the research on this, and is pretty compelling.
Our regulator in the U.S. is the enforcement division of NHTSA, for whom I actually have a lot of respect. I think those guys they really have, they're quite, I think, actually, in my experience thus far, have been quite sensible. That doesn't mean that there aren't silly things that happen from time to time, but they've really been quite sensible because they see the actual truth of the accidents, and they see the fact that there are on the order of 40,000 people killed every year in motor vehicle accidents, and so they actually they do care about the safety statistics, and they do recognize that there's always going to be some risk with cars. They're well aware of the fact that our cars are much safer than other vehicles. So there've been a few things where maybe we have had some disagreements, but like for example, coming to an absolute full stop at stop streets, even when it's very clear there are no cars anywhere in sight that could possibly cause an impact. No cars, no pedestrians, completely clear. And actually almost no humans stop at stop streets, at stop signs. Almost no humans actually come to a full stop. They may think they came to a full stop, but typically they'll be going at least a few miles an hour. So they said, well, the law does say that you have to stop at a stop street. Well, even though almost no humans do. So that actually created a bit of a challenge for us because we had to select the rare cases from the fleet where humans actually stopped at stop streets, at stop signs, and then actually get our team to stop at stop streets and then overfit the stopping at stop signs in order to get the car to stop at stop signs because it was trying to behave like a sort of good normal human driver who does not stop at stop signs. So we had a disagreement there on it, but we ultimately have made the car stop at stop signs, even though it's a little annoying. But overwhelmingly, one of the things the media will try to create is that I'm some sort of law-breaking maverick who just does what he wants and doesn't care about legal matters. This is actually not true. Of the literally millions of laws that I am subject to and my company is subject to, there are a handful over the years that we've disagreed with. Almost, but the vast majority, 99% of laws and regulations, we do abide by and we do agree with. Maybe don't agree with, we certainly abide by. There's once in a while a disagreement, but it's really minor. But if you sum up the disagreements across over the 20 years, it can just sound like a lot. But in fact, my companies are incredibly law-abiding. That's the truth of it. Anyway, I think it'll be fine from a regulatory standpoint when we can show that there's, even completely without supervision, there is a massive statistical case for self-driving being actually safer than if someone had their hands on the wheel or was even potentially having their hands on the wheel, then I think the regulators will accept that.
It's been really interesting as we were watching the breakthroughs, as everybody had, in AI, and we had agreed with you. Our original research had autonomous mobility in pretty much full force. This was our original research by now. But if we didn't have the breakthroughs in AI that we've seen, particularly transformer architecture, it wouldn't have been possible, right? But we didn't know that. Is that how you're viewing it now?
It's certainly true that transformers are transformational.
Yes.
Pretty much everyone's using transformers, and it's really just how many transformers, what kind of transformers. Are you using autoregressive transformers, which are very memory bandwidth intensive? But I think I'm not sure you can really do AI without transformers in a meaningful way. It's also very important. So, it just really looks like AGI is some combination of transformers and diffusion.
That's interesting. But does diffusion help, Elon, in the things that transformers are necessarily that good at yet, like planning and remembering, rather than sort of a current state?
I think transformers are important for all aspects of AI. Yeah, computers are very good at remembering things. Your phone remembers the video that you took down to the last pixel, whereas most humans cannot remember who they met last week. So memory is the easy. We've already outsourced memory to computers in that, like you say, how much of human knowledge is in digital form versus contained in human neurons. It's overwhelmingly in silicon rather than biological neurons. And there are these I mean, I think it's good to think of, like, to try to consider what are the most fundamental ratios. This is like in physics, you always think about looking at fundamental ratios. And one of the fundamental ratios is the ratio of digital to biological compute, just in raw compute, and how much, and the ratio of digital memory to biological memory. At what point I think at this point, I think we're probably over 99% of all memory is digital as opposed to biological. So you've got over 100 digital to biological ratio in memory at this point, trending towards 1,000 and many orders of magnitude beyond that. Then you've got the digital to biological compute ratio. And since the number of humans is more or less constant, I'm worried about humans declining quite significantly in the years to come because the birth rate is so low. But so human compute is more or less, it looks like a flat line versus time, whereas the digital compute is exponential.
Right.
And at some point, that will also be above 100, meaning more than 99% of all compute will be digital instead of biological.
Right.
And if we're not there already, we will be within a year or two.
Although it is amazing how much data biology can store, right? I believe it's estimated that a gram of dried DNA can store between 400 and 500 exabytes. So maybe there's still things to learn from biology, but yes, incredible the pace of change.
Yeah, I mean, if you encode memories in DNA like a ticker tape, then the memory potential is immense. But I'm not sure that's actually what's happening. Or if it is, I'm not sure why my memory is so terrible.
But actually, I mean, your memory in terms of the raw details, like you have an amazing search function, right?
For
I mean,
human.
yeah. Well, for any, I mean, I would argue kind of in some ways, like the transformer architecture enables effective search of a very broad amount of data. Or it's like data compression. It seems like there's many more like gigabytes encoded in disk, but actually being able to effectively search that space is pretty still primitive with compute, at least at large scale, relative to humans' ability to access information.
I mean, there's still some things that humans do better than computers. If you look, say computers have not yet discovered any fundamental physics, but humans have discovered a lot of fundamental physics. The computers have not yet invented a useful technology. Humans have invented many useful technologies. Yeah.
Do you ascribe to the notion that like you essentially training AI systems on language is not enough, and that you have to have some kind of embodied source of data, like through an Optimus robot, to actually get the raw learning in that an AI system would need to understand fundamental physics?
Yeah, so that's what I think is coming. I think what's coming is AI understanding fundamental physics and AI inventing new technologies.
It definitely feels like, rather than, even though some things now apparently pass the Turing test, most importantly, passing the money penny test, as in, can an AI actually pay bills, do expense reports to the extent James Bond did those, and actually pay parking fines and things like that? That would actually be a very good use of AI that I think would have a lot of users immediately. And maybe the Billy Connolly test of, can an AI actually be consistently funny? Those feel like they're a long way out.
Grok is pretty funny.
That's fair.
I think one of our goals for Grok is to be the funniest AI. So, I mean, if you ask Grok to provide a vulgar roast, it's really good.
Speaking of Grok, to not let down our future AI overlords, the final question on the Grok summary that Cathie touched on was the future of Bitcoin. Not sure if we want to touch on that or not, or whether that's out of
yeah,
scope.
that and then just before, I don't know if we're wrapping up here, but I'd love to talk about Bitcoin and your view of crypto assets, and then maybe back into kind of tying things up with convergences among technologies. You mentioned that a little earlier, Elon, and the impact ultimately of all of this on economic growth longer term, the surprises that might come from there. But first Bitcoin.
Okay, sure. What's the question regarding
Well,
Bitcoin?
when you put it, or Tesla put it on its balance sheet, there was, I remember afterwards, there was this backlash in terms of its economic impact, all of the energy usage and so forth. And then as part of the seminar that we did, that you participated in, Elon, we and Block had come up with this notion that, wait, you put Bitcoin mining into a utility ecosystem so that if there's a storage unit and the intermittent energy, the storage unit's full, the sun is still shining, the excess power goes over to Bitcoin, and you can mint Bitcoin and overbuild solar and wind and renewables and all of that. So that that argument against Bitcoin, and Larry Fink himself used it quite vociferously for a long time until recently, that is going away. What do you think about potential impact on the financial system, the monetary system, financial services generally?
Well, I have to say, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about cryptocurrency, hardly any at all. I have thought for a long time about money and the nature of money. What is money?
Yeah.
And it's really a database for resource allocation is the way to think about money, in my view. So now, fiat currency is actually fine as a database for resource allocation if you have a predictable money supply and it doesn't get inflated or deflated too much.
If it's rules-based.
If it's rules-based and provided government does not too much abuse their privilege to create more money, some amount of abuse is almost is guaranteed to happen, but it can go too far. The temptation over the ages to debase money is, I think it goes back to probably the ancient Sumerians. But but the point at which money was invented in any form, including in gold, there was unavoidable temptation to debase the money supply. So then you think of any given money system, again, I sort of apply information theory to in a money problem. Just think of it like it's an information system. You want to minimize noise, minimize latency, minimize packet loss. And so inflation would be adding noise to the system. If the transaction rate, if what it takes to conclude a transaction is a long time, that adds latency to the system. Fraud is kind of like packet loss. So I guess I kind of think of money like I think of information moving on a network. Bandwidth, latency, jitter, which is the variance in latency, packet loss, those fundamental elements.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch how human beings, in this case the Fed, the words they say whip around markets. And there's just something not right about that. I mean, that's my point of view. I think our point of view, certainly on the crypto team. And Art Laffer, who was my professor in school, he's supply side, Austrian School of Economics. When he collaborated on our first paper in 2018. And after he got through reading it, he said, I've been waiting for this since they closed the gold window in 1971. I've been waiting for a new rules-based global monetary system. And I think that's where our optimism comes from. This is truly rules-based. And so he's gotten more and more excited about it the more he's learned about it. So anyway, back to convergence though, and you're the maestro here. When we think of autonomous taxi platforms, robotaxi networks, and so forth, that's the convergence of three of the major platforms around which we have centered our research: robotics, energy storage, and artificial intelligence. Each one of those technologies basically gearing up for or in the sweet spot of the S curve. And I sort of think of S curves feeding S curves and creating the potential for explosive growth that no one is expecting. And Brett has just written a paper, it should come out in the next few weeks, around this topic. Just want to get your thoughts about that. And Brett, if you wanted to ask any questions specifically about that. But the bottom line from an economics point of view is we could see very surprising uptick, not just uptick, a step function up in a real economic growth if these technologies are as big as we think they are.
Yeah, absolutely. The real economy is not money, it's goods and services. As I was saying earlier, money is really just a database for resource allocation. And but if there are no resources to allocate, or if the actual goods and services output is fixed, then you can, I guess, try to allocate that same pie, but more efficiently, but it's really not nearly as good as growing the pie. So growing this output of goods and services, productivity is really the thing that leads to prosperity. And obviously with robotics and AI, I think digital medicine through synthetic RNA, and I think these things will just massively improve productivity. Just if you take the car as an example, and I think you understand this quite well, although not many people do, that if you've got, say, a passenger car, it will typically see 10 to 12 hours of usage, like maybe 1.5 hours a day over the course of 7 days. But there are 68 hours in a week. So it's really used for a very small percentage of the week normally. And then you've got to park it somewhere as well. So you've got parking costs, storage costs, maintenance costs, and all these costs associated with the car, and at 5 to 10% of asset utilization for a car. Whereas if you've got an autonomous vehicle, that same car that costs basically about the same could now, I think, be used as a rough approximation for about a third of the hours of the week. If you say like productive hours, and this is, I think that's a conservative, but I think it's not far wrong. So if you say like it goes from say 10 hours a week to 50 hours a week out of 168 of useful hours, that I think it's not going to be exactly right, but I don't think it's far wrong. You now have the same asset being able to having 5 times the utility. That is a staggering leap of productivity. And if Tesla's able to do as I think we will be able to do, which is to upgrade the fleet to make it autonomous, it will be the biggest step change in asset value in history, I think, overnight.
We agree.
Right. Converted here,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
And that's why I prefaced it by I realize I'm preaching to the converted.
But you're also underestimating the utility uplift, because that 10 hours that the car is driving a week, somebody is not being paid to drive it, mostly. Right. But they're devoting their valuable brain to doing it. As in kind of, it's actually, there's the human labor loss that accompanies that as well. And so freeing up those hours is actually, I think on Tasha's work, it's as meaningful as the capital utilization benefit.
Absolutely. And I think you've also predicted a massive increase in traffic, because once you take away the pain of driving, people will go more places. So there'll actually be more cars on the road driving more places, because if you can sit in the car and be watching a movie or be texting legally, then that's really much less pain than having to navigate arduous traffic for an hour and a half.
Yeah, many people miss that. I remember it just frustrated me that GM and its marketing material and presentations would say zero congestion, because I think
Hilarious.
our work would suggest the amount of traffic, and that's what pushed us into doing more with drones and delivery of food and parcels with drones, and even air taxis, because cannot imagine the commute from JFK into Manhattan being 4 hours or 5 hours or 6 hours. So
yes, well, fortunately, I have a proposed solution to that, which consists of tunnels.
yes. And we're now in St. Petersburg. If you could build a tunnel from here to Tampa, which is just sand, you're not going to run into anything, that'd be very cool.
We can absolutely do that.
Yeah.
So the Boeing company has actually made tremendous progress. It has, I think, at this point, by far the most advanced tunneling machine. The thing that is the biggest inhibitor of Boeing company by far is regulatory approval. We are in the United States, and particularly in some states like California, we are being strangled by regulation.
Yeah.
And this is an important point to make, which is, I think, obvious when you think about it, that if we keep making more rules and regulations and laws every year, and those laws and regulations are immortal, but humans are not immortal, then over time, you're like Gulliver, where you're tied down by millions of strings, you can't move.
It's true. It's true. That's why your first principles approach to your business is so interesting. I wish we had first principles approach to policy making, and because you're right, the regulations are strangling. The only good news here in this, and we've seen it, is other countries want innovation. The U.S. has been the source of a lot of innovation, but some of our look at the FAA and drones. That business has done much better elsewhere in the world. It's been very frustrated here, and now the FAA is starting to play ball because of it. Do you think that competitive dynamic or regulatory arbitrage will change things anytime soon, or do we just need someone to come in first principles and kind of figure out a way to convince everyone we need to get a white sheet of paper and not start all over, but what I mean?
I think we need to have a process for garbage collection of rules and regulations. That if you don't have some means of deleting rules and regulations, and you only ever add them, then that will obviously just end up in a situation where everything's illegal.
Yes.
Which is where we are. And kind of the bigger and more complex the state is, like California and New York, you just have, I guess, first approximation, the number of regulators you have is proportionate to your population. So although Texas and Florida do better in that regard, but there's just so many rules and regulations in California and New York. And if you say LA County, City of LA, it can take you several months simply to get a permit to change the tiles in your bathroom. Literally, that's the thing. We've got to do something here, or we're just doomed.
Need a plan.
Yeah.
For this reason, Elon, do you think China is at a competitive advantage? It's command and control. I've heard you say that they're very tech savvy down to the mayor of every city. Do you think what has happened over that there's a dynamic changing? Maybe they've over leveraged after 20 years of basically buying the dip was the right thing to do until it wasn't. Do you think that it is now entered more of a Japanese style? They have to readjust to a new reality, or do you think the regulatory or less regulation over there is going to give them a competitive advantage, and innovation is going to help bail them out?
I don't think China is not immune to the same forces that have driven excess regulation and laws in the United States or Europe. I've certainly seen, just in the course of our operations in China, Tesla in China, we've seen quite a substantial increase in the regulatory burden. It's a lot harder to get things done now than it was 10 years ago. So what I'm saying is I think this is just a natural part of the evolution of any country. There's the growth of rules and regulations. Now, in history, the forcing function for cleaning up bad rules and regulations, archaic rules, and things that don't really matter anymore has been war. That has been what has been the cleansing function for rules and regulations. Now, we would like to avoid war, as ideally we can do this without war. That would be nice. That would be nice.
Has it ever happened? Has it ever happened before? I know you're a student of war and battles and that you really understand that dynamic. Have we ever cleansed the system without it?
I'm not aware of a situation like that. Yes. Now, the thing is, in history, wars were very common. So we're in this odd bit of history where war is quite rare. We're talking about total population of the world divided by number by the percentage of the population at war. If you say, look, what percentage of Earth's population is actively at war? It's very tiny today compared to any time in history. People confuse hearing about war from being in war. They're very different.
I think exposing, and I know you did in Ukraine with Starlink, exposing what's going on is half of the solution in a sense, right? Or maybe the reason that we're not going through the horrors of war, because you can see it in living color and how devastating it is.
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly something that is possible that was not possible in the past, although it clearly doesn't stop the Ukraine war.
Right.
That's still going on. And I think a lot of things, if there'd been social media, it's not clear they would have happened at all. Like the creation of the United States. I was thinking if there'd been social media at the time of Roanoke, I think people would have been dissuaded from future voyages. It's like we're dying of starvation, being killed by the locals. We're rife with disease.
That's a good point. Very good.
But that is another way to reset the regulatory landscape, is kind of exploration, right? I mean, like, who knows what? I'm sure there's some set of laws that apply on the moon and potentially Mars, but it's much more difficult to enforce laws from that long a distance.
Yeah, I think ultimately, if there is a self-sustaining city on Moon or Mars, that self-sustaining city will achieve autonomy at some point. I think it's quite important that extremely important that we become a multi-planet civilization and create a self-sustaining city, ideally on Mars, because that's quite far away from Earth. And I think if something were to take down Earth civilization, then it's less likely to take out a Mars civilization, because Earth and Mars are only in the same quadrant of the solar system for 6 months every 2 years. So we've got a lot of separation. And I think a lot about the Fermi paradox of where are the aliens. I've seen no evidence of aliens. People always ask me if I've seen any evidence of aliens. I would immediately shout from the rooftops and from the X platform of any evidence whatsoever about aliens. I would be talking about it immediately. And I have thus far seen none. That's a concern, because it means that we perhaps are alone, and maybe there were many other civilizations, but they failed to pass the great filter of going from one planet to being a multi-planet civilization. So I guess my concern is that we need to keep civilization going at least long enough to be a multi-planet civilization. At that point, I think we stabilize civilization and consciousness and greatly extend the probable lifespan of civilization and consciousness as we know it. Now, I do want to emphasize this is not some escape hatch from Earth, because people misinterpret this as like some escape hatch from Earth. This really doesn't apply to me personally, because I will probably die in, I don't know, 40 or 50 years, hopefully living that long. Maybe I don't live even that long. But civilization can last for tens of thousands of years, perhaps hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years. So I think it's very important that we make life multiplanetary while the window is open. And this is the first time in the history of Earth that in 4.5 billion years of Earth's existence that it's been possible to extend life and consciousness to another planet. So that window is now open. for the first time in 4.5 billion years. Now, it may stay open for a long time, but it may also close. And I think so we should just take advantage of the time when the window is open to make life multiplanetary and ensure that the tiny candle of consciousness in a vast darkness continues to burn, does not go out.
Do you think that Starlink, you've said kind of advanced the idea that you needed hypersonic travel to basically capitalize colonizing Mars. Is Starlink enough, or do you still need that second kind of like business model built on top of SpaceX to make it happen?
I think Starlink is enough. There's a little diagram on the Starlink router. It's for people probably don't notice, but it's a Hohmann transfer from Earth to Mars. So if you look on your Starlink router, you'll see that transfer diagram. That is the means by which life becomes multiplanetary. So,
well, Elon, you are pioneering us in an amazing way. A lot of the hope for the future is so much of it has started with projects you've started and dreams you have, and I think the world's a better place. And I'll end where I started. I know that media clicks, maybe negative it works, but long run truth wins out, and you're doing amazing things, and I think the world will thank you for years and years.
And maybe just a close. Oh, sorry, I clicked back on mute. Just as a closing thought to build off that, maybe as well. How would you think about inspiring the next generation of entrepreneurs to do the really big, hard things? Does it make most sense to try and do something more consumer internet or something earlier, build up capital, and then go and do something very hard? Or do you think, like, what would you want to have heard as a starting out entrepreneur thinking about that journey? And also to inspire the next generation to do great things, including building all the cottage industry, no doubt, of things that we'll need to survive on Mars.
Great question.
Well, I actually think that anyone that has a company that's providing goods and services is doing great. I mean, it's not that everyone should tackle so-called great challenges. I would recommend that they don't actually, because the probability of failure is very high. I mean, just try to be useful is my advice. It's very difficult to be useful. Say like total area under the curve of how useful have you been to other people that cumulatively, it's very hard to make that a big number. So I really just try to be useful and make great products and services that people want and make their lives better. That's it. And as far as encouraging entrepreneurs to start companies, my advice would be that if you need encouragement to start a company, don't do it.
Right. Yep.
Because the probability of failure is very high. So you really should not, if you need encouragement, don't do it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Elon. As I think as it's clear, if you have an idea that will fill an unmet need that something the world really needs, and you have a passion to go for it, then yes. But agreed, the probability of failure is, Brett, I think, is it 2% for new businesses? 90%?
It's on what stage you measure it at, but yeah.
Yeah, from startup. Yeah. So.
But that said, anyone that doesn't need encouragement, we'd love to hear from you for the Arc Venture Fund.
That's good.
I mean, I just have a lot of respect for anyone who works hard and builds things, provides products and services to their fellow humans. And I think that's great. Just a lot of respect for an honest day's work. If I go, all right, well, it's been a great discussion.
Thank you, Elon, so much.
Yeah.
This is great.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Right.
And Elon, I think the world needs more of this kind of conversation. So maybe every once in a while we can do this again.
Sure. That's good.
Thanks.